So I thought what I'd do is tell a short story. And this short story is how I ended up here talking to you tonight. About 10 years ago, in fact 10 years next month, I was made redundant from investment banking. Investment bankers, as you know, are now the pariahs of our society and responsible for most of the ills that we're still suffering from. Well, I was one of those. And 10 years ago next week, I was led from the premises, given 20 minutes to pack, and told that I wasn't employed anymore. It really does happen, and it happened to me. And when it happens, it's not very nice. But it was a release, and it was the happiest day of my life. I can say that, other than speaking to you tonight. So having been made redundant, I wondered what to do. I went walking in Cyprus. I went to work on a farm, feeding cattle in Wales for a few months, which nearly killed me, and I realised what an easy life investment bankers have. But it made me think, and it sobered me up, and it made me decide I wasn't going to do that anymore. I certainly wasn't going to give investment advice for anybody else. I was going to do it for myself. I was going to live my own life, which means I had to learn to live on very little money, which I've taken to like a duck to water, surprisingly. Whilst doing this, I live in Bath, as some of you know, and I was visiting the farmer's market and picked up a philosophy book about Chinese philosophy, ancient Chinese philosophy, about which I had some interest but no knowledge. Anyway, I read that book, excited my interest, and it really triggered a development that has brought me here. Because one of the things I've learned about ancient China is that they believe in the coincidence of unrelated events, whereas in the West, we believe that events act in a linear, predictable manner. That's what our science is based on. Chinese ancient philosophy is not based on that. It's based on capturing coincidence and how coincidence swirl around us all every day to dictate our lives. Anyway, whilst I was enjoying studying this, I came across lots of old stuff that, about which there are many books available in this bookstore, about oracle bones and how the Chinese used to inscribe these bones with oracle readings. This is between 1600 and 1247 BC. Having read quite a lot of Chinese history, I'm quite familiar now with the early dynasties. And these oracle bones, what did they used to do? They would press a hot rod in the back of a piece of bone, it would crack on the other side, and then they'd read that crack. They'd interpret it, and they'd write down what it meant. And they'd use that as guidance for getting married, for sowing crops, for waging wars, for many of the things that our governments maybe should do today, because they certainly need some guidance. But the outcome of this was to just provoke my interest more so, and I came across something that you will know as the I-ching. More in modern day it's known as the Jing, just as we call Peking now Beijing. Then the I-ching has really been renamed the Jing for some time. Anyway, I learned about that, found it very interesting, thought nothing of it. Realised I had to get a job. So I got a job on a board of a company owned by a friend of mine in healthcare. And we're all subject these days to these diagnostic tests where they measure your DNA and they look at your sensibilities to different disease states or different things happening, and they measure them statistically. That taught me something because I'm not a scientist. I realised how numbers are important, and I thought about the I Ching and the numbers that I seem to think that the Chinese employed in coming up with these predictions. Anyway, that was another strand in my life, and the two weren't connected. But I got a job on a board and I learnt something about DNA. In addition, my old colleagues said to me, why don't you come and work with us? We've got a client who's actually a mobile phone company, betting on mobile phones and gaming on mobile phones. I said, I don't know anything about that. They said, but you do know how to raise money, and they need money, and we want you to raise it. So I did. Got to know this mobile phone gaming business, and they had operated this system called How Low, where you could bid for products, but it was the lowest bid that won it. So you could win a Ferrari by bidding 47p. Providing nobody else bid 47p, you'd get the Ferrari. I thought, that's a nice trick. And this guy was bragging about inventing this product. And selling it worldwide and making a lot of money. And I thought, well, there's nothing clever in that. I'll convert words into numbers. A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, D is 4, Z is 26. And I'll convert words to numbers. And I'll call it Summit, because it sums words up. So I actually came up in a pub in Bath with this product called Summit. And I was sitting with my friends and said to them, I'll tell you what, think of a Premiership footballer whose name scores the most using my Summit number system. A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, dead simple. Think of a football player in the Premier League that scores the most but don't use more than 12 letters. He gave me a Liverpool player, I gave him John Terry. I scored the most. I scored 150 points or whatever it was. I said, it's your round. And then what I did was go to the mobile company and develop that on a mobile device. So you could text, you could ask any question. A European EU member that scores the most but don't use more than 6 letters. I'll tell you the winner now, it's Cyprus. But you can go to lots of different subjects, vary the number of letters, and you get infinite answers. This became Summit. It became a boxed game. I sold it to a company called Winning Moves, and it was on sale in the stores. It was advertised in the underground in London, and I was really pleased with myself. Didn't make any money out of it, but quite pleased. But then I went back to my Chinese studying, continued to do it, went back to my diagnostics business and learnt more about DNA, and one day, ka-ching, the penny dropped. I realised that making words count through my game was not the most important thing. People count as well. And what I did was to start to convert people's names into numbers and adding their date of birth in. And then I realised that we all have a set of numbers that's individual to each of us. And then I thought more about it and thought, well, that's interesting. I now know something about real DNA, but what I've invented here is digital DNA. So I trademarked it. There's now a worldwide trademark on something called digital DNA. And I can use it because I invented it. I can't believe it even now, but I did it 5 years ago. And if you look up digital DNA, you'll find it's owned by me. So what? Didn't think any more about it. Then I realised maybe I could do something with this set of numbers that's unique to everybody. And whilst I was on the board of this digital business, the guy I knew, the chairman, he was chairman of this business. This is called a molecular diagnostics business. And he was also chairman of a children's cartoon business called Storyland. So he had quite diverse interests. And I thought, I know what I'll do his numbers. So I did his digital DNA, and then with my kanji Japanese starter, which one of my students gave me, I thought, I'm going to construct an image based on his numbers, and then I'm going to see if there's a Japanese or Chinese word that looks like it and see what it says, just for a laugh. I did it. It's still in there, that's why I brought the book with me so you can look at it. The notes are in there, and it says, the image, it says molecular diagnostics and children's stories. And this was this guy who was chairman of a molecular company and also chairman of a children's cartoon business. I thought, that's just a freak. Things like that don't happen. So then I did it for a woman I know who suffered from ME for 20 years, and I'd just come back from a world cruise, the first time she'd been out of the house for 15 years. And she said, oh, while you're doing that, do one for me. So I did one for her. What'd you get? By this time I was harnessing it to the i-ching readings, and I got the reading for travelling and health. She looked at it, she went, woohoo, ran round the room, and I thought, I've just struck lucky again. Yeah, it's coincidence. It's just coincidence. That's what we say. It's just a coincidence. The Chinese ancients didn't say that. They'd say that's what life's all about. So, next thing was, I still knew and still do now a woman who works in Birmingham in corporate finance. She's got 4 children. I thought, I'll do her digital DNA and I'll do the same for each of her children. I'll do all their digital DNA and I'll see if I can trace their numbers to their mother or their father and see who's most like whom. Completely arbitrary. And there was a similarity between each child and the parents except for one. can't give his name, I know the little boy, and he was no relation whatsoever to the father, and some relation to the mother. Now you have to be very sensitive at this point, which I was, and she admitted that he was born to a different father and that they don't tell anybody. And that really hit me, because one coincidence you can dismiss, two you say that's interesting, three you begin to feel there's something freaky going on. Anyway, this was happening to me, and I was continuing to work in these different jobs. What happened then? Well, I got more interested in the Chinese philosophy, rewrote all of the i-ching writings in modern English. And I could show you the app afterwards if you've got time to show you what my reading is today, which actually is very, very odd, very eerie, because it tells me I'm speaking to an audience. And unfortunately it says you're going to have some friction with that audience. So we'll see whether that comes true. But it's not predictive, it just gives you a set of images which, because of the way you frame a question in your mind, you relate to those images and you tap in to a subconscious element. That's the way it works. I'm not sure that the ancient Chinese thought that or thought it through, but it's the way I can express it. Anyway, in my studies, I read everything I could on this subject, and I continue to do so. I've added them up. There's about 200 books and journals I've read. Can't read Mandarin, so I went into the University of Manchester, went up to a lady who I'd heard on Radio 4 talking about China. She was a reputable historian, and I said to her, "Can you help me in my quest to learn more about ancient China?" She said, "No, bugger off." She didn't want anything to do with me. So I walked along the corridor, bumped into another lady who happened to be a professor of Mandarin. She's now my closest Chinese friend and has helped me work through documents in old Mandarin, which is not necessarily the same as modern Chinese. And she's also been to China with me twice and helped me, and she's mentioned in the book. The outcome of this is that I found a book in John Ryland's library, Manchester University, dated 1596, which they didn't know they had. There's quite a number of Chinese books they don't know they had. These books got to Manchester through the missionaries, the Belgian and French missionaries who brought them back to Paris. The Paris library ran out of the money. A wealthy industrialist from Manchester's wife, who apparently had nothing better to do, bought the library, brought it to Manchester, and it's never been classified properly. So I was looking through this with my Mandarin speaking friend and discovered quite some revolutionary stuff that I'd never seen before. But what it did, and I've got I know can't be seen on any camera, but I'm going to hand these round for you to look at these images, just to have a look through 1 to 10 and pass them round. What I found was images that clearly showed that the Chinese used the same system of number 4 as the root of their philosophy as we use number 4 as the root of our DNA. Now, I'm not a scientist, but there are 4 nucleotides that combine to arrange your proteins in your body. They dictate what your DNA is. These 4 nucleotides combine in triplets, and they can only be 64 outcomes. It's exactly the same as the i-ching. Starts with base 4 to the power of 3 gives you 64. And the whole Chinese philosophy of heaven is based on 64 hexagrams swirling round the world and coinciding with daily events to dictate your life. I then realised I'd hit the jackpot, because I'd already trademarked digital DNA, I'd already worked out what it was. I could now link it to ancient China, where I'm convinced they actually were thousands of years ahead of us, or maybe it was just another coincidence. To end this short story, what I did then was read everything I could by Carl Jung, because he had discovered what I have now discovered. A much cleverer man than me, and much more familiar with psychoanalyst and also a trained medic. I discovered that he set up an institute on Lake Maggiore called the Eranos Institute, which was still going today. and it was set up by what I suspect was a girlfriend of his in the 1930s. I've now been to Iranos at Lake Maggiore, hoping to see lots of this i-ching stuff, Chinese material. There's nothing there. There's his study, there's a painting of him with pipe in hand, there's his books, and there's lots of his pictures, but nothing Chinese. And when I said to the woman who runs the place, where's his material linking to China and what he did on Chinese stuff, she said, oh, that's all back in London. And I just come from London looking for it. So she sent me back to London. I arrived at the Warburg Institute, which I'm now a member of, which is not too far from the British Library. Went in there, and all of his materials there, unloved and unopened, been there 30, 40, 50 years. I've been through the lot. And what struck me again as an interesting coincidence was Warburg's, for those of you who don't know, was the original top investment bank in Europe, and especially the UK. And that what had happened in this short story is that I'd been sacked by an investment bank, and I'd gone through the whole process and ended up back at an investment bank that started it all in the first place. Now, about the book tells you this story, but what it does also is it explains how you can, using this ancient knowledge and using your personal numbers, which is like a digital fingerprint, no other person will have your digital fingerprint. It links your personal character traits to the ancient readings written by me in modern format. It's different every day. No two people get the same combination of readings on any day. It's not like a horoscope. It's not going to tell you how to live your life, but it will tell you how. It will give you comfort in making decisions, and it will highlight issues going on in your life. It's psychotherapeutic. You frame a question, and once you've framed a question, and this is what Chinese language reflects, you see an image. You might not see it visibly, but you construct one in your mind. And by looking at the reading, which is uniquely yours, you pick out in the texts the parts that are relevant to what's on your mind. That's how it works. It's like a form of personal counselling. It's very useful, and it's uncanny sometimes. That's what it's all about. The book enables you to do this for yourself by hand. You don't need an app. You don't need to go on a computer. You can simply do it all by hand. It's all provided in the book. That's what it's all about. It tells the story and elaborates more on what I've said today. And some of the images are now going around. One of the images on the back, which was particularly interesting, yet another coincidence, is last summer I went to CERN, where they're looking for the particle, the God particle. Many of you will have heard about it, this massive experiment in CERN. And I looked at the roof of the building I was in, and 6 months before I'd been in Beijing looking at the roof of the Temple of Heaven, which reflects the philosophy I've just been talking about. And if you look at the photograph, which is also in the book, they're almost identical. So something from 2000 BC, constructed to demonstrate the Chinese philosophy, looks identical to the most modern and expensive physics experiment on Earth today. Nothing much changes. And then you say to yourself, well, maybe it's another coincidence. But there's just too many to ignore. That's it. If anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to have a chat with you afterwards. Okay.